Okay, I think it is 9:05 in Susana's watch and it is 7:35 in my watch. So let us begin the session today with Susana. Before we start, just some housekeeping announcements. So we hope that it is a safe and conducive space for all the participants today for this discussion. We have interpretations available from Spanish to English and English to Spanish today. Susana will be talking in Spanish. So for people who want to hear in English, please press the globe icon on your screen and select English. I would request you to rename yourself, mentioning your name, country, and organizational affiliation so that we know where you're joining from. Please refrain from sharing any inappropriate audio, video, or written content in the chat or Q&A box. Please do not take any photographs or videos of the workshop proceedings. And to eliminate the ambient noise, all participants will be requested to keep themselves muted unless they're talking or asking a question. If you do want to ask a question, please use raise your hand feature or write your question in the chat box. The session is being recorded and we would like to share the recording on YouTube as well as International Campaign for Women's Rights to Safe Abortion newsletter. And if anybody wants to remain anonymous, please let me know. We do have the details here about the network. I had shared about this last time also. In case you want to join the YANA network, this slide has already been sent to you. Please click on the link here and fill in the registration form and you will be added to the YANA listserv. I will stop this slide and I will hand it over to Susana. Before that, just want to do a quick introduction. Thanks so much for joining us today, Susana. Susana is an obstetrician with a master in public health and training on public policy. She is also the founder and executive director of Promsex, Center for the Promotion and Defense of Sexual and Reproductive Rights. And she's the executive secretary of the Latin American Consortium Against Unsafe Abortion called FLACAE. We are so happy to have you with us today, Susana. Over to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Shutri, por este espacio, por esta posibilidad de
Thank you very much, Shruti, for this space, the possibility to share and reach all of those who are joining us today. In fact, for me, as a member of FLACAE, as executive secretary, but also as member of this activist space, I would like to take advantage of saying hello for the 20th of September to everyone who is joining us. What I was asked to talk about was the experiences of girls, not mothers, and what we're doing to try to get justice for girls in Latin America. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Very well. Girls, Not Mothers is a regional initiative that started about in 2011 or 2012 as a result of the concerns of what was happening with pregnancies in girls, despite the fact that many of these cases, these girls, well, generally were victims of rape and they should have been allowed to have access to safe abortion, but they didn't. So with that, Girls Not Mothers becomes a regional movement. And in 2014, they set the agenda for the region and they start talking about pregnancies in girls. And they open up a debate. This is an initiative from Planned Parenthood, FLACAE, Amnesty International, HIRE, and we started this process, but in reality, shortly after, this is opened up to a great community, and now we have dozens of organizations that belong to this initiative. So, Girls Not Mothers has a proposal or an initiative that is called the coup. What do we mean by the coup? A articulated action amongst 3 countries that proposes bringing to the legal agenda pregnancies in girls. This initiative that involves states, the states of Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Ecuador, where the girls were not given access to abortion and they were forced to carry their pregnancies to term, and this led us to demand justice for these girls. And we have a group of organizations, amongst them the Center for Reproductive Rights, Planned Parenthood, Surcude, Promsex, Women Transforming the World in Guatemala, and we have Amnesty, Hire, and Clacay as support. But sorry. We have 4 cases. We are going to, I'm sorry. These are not the only 4 cases. We see that this is something repetitive and we have identified new cases in the region. So what is the reality of our countries related to forced pregnancies in girls that are under 15 years of age? Well, first, we see it constantly. We find it in almost all of the countries in the region. Unfortunately, this has been a problem that has been normalized or accepted. So it has generated a culture of acceptance that girls that under the age of 15 could carry a pregnancy. For example, the numbers show this. In Colombia, every hour a girl is sexually abused. In Ecuador, out of 11 reports of rape, 10 are girls under the age of 14. In Paraguay, 2 girls that become mothers between the ages of 10 and 14. And in Peru, we have 1,158 girls under the age of 15 that are already mothers. In Guatemala, we have had, in 2019, 7,366 girls under the age of 15 becoming mothers. The same thing in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, 5 girls are forced to be mothers every day. And in Mexico, 4 out of every 10 victims of sexual violence are under the age. Out of these cases, we selected 4 stories. These stories are of Norma, Lucia, Fatima, and Susana. In those cases, in none of their countries were they guaranteed protection and comprehensive care that they deserved as victims of
What time did you go?
violations. So now, till now, none of those girls has received any sort of justice. None of them had access to legal abortion. Norma, Lucia, and Fatima and Susana were all forced to become mothers, despite the fact that this would affect their physical and mental health, and it also interrupted their life projects. And these girls, during their pregnancy cares and birth, they had to suffer obstructive violence. None of them were provided information or even the support to be able to deliver, despite being so young. And at a national level, none of these cases was investigated. There was never any justice provided. So this means that with that, we formed this team of lawyers, and these lawyers brought these 4 cases. They presented them to the United Nations Human Rights Committee reporting the violations these girls had suffered. These are our attorneys from the 3 countries that, and we also have the teams of Planned Parenthood and the Center for Reproductive Rights. So how has the process been? And this is why I think it's important to tell you. We want to think about how through women's movements we can demand justice. This process has had a phase that was building up the cases, identifying exactly what had happened to the girls, and how applicable international forums are. So we had a pre-litigation stage that took a considerable amount of time to investigate and to characterize the cases. So here we reviewed the profiles of the victims, whether the victims corresponded to the systematized violence that we were finding, who the perpetrators were, also to see whether there was a repetition or a characterization that would allow us to say that this is systematic in the region. And we also cataloged the repeated patterns of sexual violence and how this was affecting the autonomy, access to services, equality and non-discrimination, and protection of their life projects, and also access to justice. Once we had clearly defined the pattern, we had to define objectives. Why are we going to these international instances to bring this debate? So there definitely was the need to highlight the realities and national challenges of the local organizations and how we had identified the fact that this was a systematic pattern of violence. We also looked and started to generate a social awareness that what we had to remove from decision makers' heads is that this was normalized, that it was accepted, that this was something that really was because of their families and it happened in poor communities. And we had to make them think that the states had to do something so that girls had equality in all social spheres. And we had to see which of the international and human rights standards had been violated and how and where the countries, the respective countries that were going to generate the demand, had commitments for compliance. And I think that's very important for accountability. And we also looked at the efforts that had been made in each one of the countries so that these topics could be resolved in a national sphere without having to go to an international sphere. And of course, this allowed us to map the arguments and the obligations that we had as a country to later have this comparison or to be able to see where the failure had happened. And in the pre-litigation stage, we also asked the question, where are we going? Or what forum are we going to? What can really adapt to what we expect, but also to what the violated girls and the public policies of the countries could transform. And something that we did consider from the beginning was to make sure we took care of the victims. The victims could not be re-victimized, could not have something happen to them without their consent. And we also wanted them to know what this strategic litigation would imply, where we were talking about their case and their story, and that we wanted to make sure that this would not lead to greater damage for them. This was something very important to involve the girls, the families, and their communities. So this is where we started to define our objective in going to the international instances. First, we had the international standards that we had to appeal to for these girls to be able to get justice. And in fact, one of the standards that we found was the obligation, reinforced obligation for teenage girls that the states have to prevent sexual violence and guarantee comprehensive care for the victims, and their duty to investigate, judge, sanction with due diligence, and give reparations to the victims of sexual violence. The other standard was the right that the girls and teenagers have to decide with autonomy and freedom and information about their lives, their bodies, and their reproduction. And consequently, the obligation that the states have to guarantee access to information, education, health services, sexual and reproductive services without discrimination, where the girls, without which the girls could not have been able to exercise their rights. Also, we propose the obligation that the states have to guarantee the girls and teenagers access to abortion, understanding it as an essential health service, especially for victims of rape who should have access to this service under the known health causal. And the evidence shows how to carry, shows that carrying a pregnancy in this age group has a lot of physical and mental risks that are exacerbated when they are a product of a rape. So, in fact, this also allowed us to see the structural changes that we needed to ask of the countries. So, what was the petition going to be for each one of the countries? For example, for Nicaragua, the committee should recommend reviewing and modifying the internal legislature. We wanted to promote the legalization of health causals or health cause conforming to international rights. In Guatemala, we wanted the life causal to be interpreted broadly because Guatemala only has abortion, legal abortion, when there is risk to life. And necessarily, this should include the risk to physical and mental health according to international standards. In Ecuador, what we said is that this life causal should be interpreted broadly, including a life with dignity and a recommendation so that the health committee could include physical, social, and mental health in this life causal or cause. So then, internationally, what did we recommend? Because this wasn't just directed to the countries, we also wanted to have a regional impact. That's why we call it a regional cum. The duty to protect and teenage girls, understanding them as subjects that have the right to decide on their lives, bodies, and futures, and the protections and guarantees of their sexual and reproductive rights, especially access to abortion for girls that have been victims of sexual violence.
De hecho, lo que se ha trabajado
In this sense, what we worked on were certain rights such as protecting girls and guaranteeing them access to reproductive health, including the right to life, but the right to life should also include a life with dignity to reduce the negative impacts that could affect this life with dignity, and the recognition that forced pregnancy and forced maternity are cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment. So, which were the discussion forums? Who did we pick as the spaces for advocacy? We did an analysis. The attorneys analyzed the mechanisms, instances for human rights that could adapt themselves best. And there were certain criteria that they used, such as the mechanism or the instance that can receive the case. Do they have agreements or treaties or commitments with the countries, and therefore the instance could have some sort of demand something? Also, the response capacity of the countries. In Nicaragua, for example, it may be true that Nicaragua has signed commitments to CEDAW. They have not considered certain things, so it's very difficult to have individual demands in this context. So something very dangerous, well, not dangerous, very important was considered. How much time could these legal processes take? And out of all of this, we reached the conclusion that the United Nations system was the most adequate one. First, because it took less time, where our regional committee, that is the Human Rights Committee of the Americans, could take 15 years, the universal system can give you an answer in less than 5 years. There was also jurisprudence, existing jurisprudence and recommendations on these subjects. There was also general reparations, and there was a universal scope. And that one's very important for everyone because it doesn't just remain in Latin America or in the regional systems, but it also applies to the whole world. And well, the cost was more reasonable in terms of what we could do. So what we did was establish agreements with the victims to protect them. For example, that their representation was free for the victims. We also decided to maintain confidentiality. What we are informing is the situation of the process, and we would be the ones that would be doing the intermediation with the media. We always make sure, and this is a commitment that we have when we take on strategic litigation cases, is to protect the victims, even from a press that may not understand the problem. We also had to carry out these demand processes for the states more than the persons. So this is how this was accompanied with a communications campaign. Today, girls, not mothers, is a significant slogan that has been incorporated into the demands for rights. It's part of our narrative and our language, and it has allowed us to make this project public. We've been able to put out this call to society so that we can together face these cases and also generate conditions so that the countries can prepare to implement these changes, such as the incorporation, or making sure that no girl should be forced to be mother, and abortion should be an elemental or basic right within the protection of sexual rights. This has led us to think about litigation that is implemented with a strategy that includes communications and aspects that are related to advocacy. And we also were able to create alliances with the communities in each one of the countries with this slogan that is girls, not mothers. This is the timeline. It's a brief summary from presenting these 4 cases, launching the regional coup, and how we have worked on the cases, assessing, going to international instances, going to sessions to finally have this admitted by the International Court or the Human Rights Committee of the UN. And November for us will be a very important month where we hope to receive the response for these cases, and we hope that we can give the world, provide the world a new standard for how to treat these girls. This is the experience that I wanted to tell you about. This is where we're at, or where you can find us in social media. And we have to remember that becoming part of Girls Not Mothers is to inform, to educate, to support, and to stop violence. It is a comprehensive commitment that we have, and this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susana. That was very interesting. I really liked how you shared it in the form of a story, and it was a very interesting story. So I think we can open the room for question and answers. If anybody has any questions for Susana, you can use raise hand feature or you can write it on chat. Susana, I have one question. I was wondering that when you had represented the consortium in the UN, how was your experience with the delegates from these countries? Were those delegates open to negotiations, etc.? Because one time when I had gone to the UN Human Rights Council, I noticed that the delegates of our country were not so receptive. So I was wondering how it was with your experience.
Bueno, yo primero quiero señalar que yo soy
First, I wanted to point out that I'm part of the initiative, but I'm not an attorney, so I didn't actually directly participate in these processes. But I do know how these initiatives are generated. In fact, one of the things that we usually do is participate in the reports of IPO and the reports that the shadow reports that the countries give, so that there is awareness of the process beforehand. Another thing that was important was the identification of representatives or allies from the countries and governments, allies that could share these concerns. And this allows you to have a good approach. And the third element that I think was very, very important is to have the presence of our colleagues, the colleagues that we have in Geneva and other international instances doing permanent work, and they allow us to have a good connection and to be able to identify positive actors. And in fact, for our country representatives, they don't like to hear about these topics. We have, for example, the precedent of the LSC case, where every year we would go and present a demand that Peru did not have a therapeutic or medical abortion protocol, and the country representative would always go to the meeting and say, well, we're approving this protocol next week. And then we went back to the country, and that, of course, did not exist. So it's a permanent back and forth. Yes, I am talking about many years of work, but I would recommend that these processes should be worked through alliances. And I think the alliances of the global organizations are very important, like the Center for Reproductive Rights, Amnesty International. And I also think that the strength that these regional spaces have is fundamental. In our case, we have a specialized group that is the legal network of Clacay, where you can also articulate efforts, but this is something that you have to build in your region, because indeed the union creates a force.
Thank you. There is a question here in the chat. I will read it out. Sarina cannot talk because there's noise in the background. So she's asking, I'm interested with the timeline of the case. Is this always the case when filing in international human rights committees? Like, how long does it usually take to get a response from them? What could be the challenges where there might be a delay in their response, if ever? And how does this become helpful in our overall campaign for safe abortion?
Bueno, yo quisiera empezar por lo último.
I will start by the last thing, and that is how helpful it is. We found that definitely it does lead to change. We have another conversation. We're reaching another level of debate and discussion, and it is tedious. And I mean, say we've grown old in this process. I can tell you that when we accompanied the LC case, she was 13. When we were able to reach this agreement with the state, this girl was 24. So this is the timeline. This is how long it took. And yes, this long-term accompanying is a challenge, because first we're talking about victims that don't just carry the fact that their rights were violated, but also generally we're speaking about victims in a condition of poverty and vulnerability. Therefore, it really does require accompanying them in the cases, and many times accompanied for life. And that is why we have strategic litigation, because in reality, because the impact isn't just accompanying them legally, but the idea is to make sure that these processes do not destroy them, and with them we work on processes for improvement. And this is all part of the commitments that we have, and that is why unfortunately we cannot represent all the cases, but we have to pick a very few that require it. Fortunately, we see more agencies, the cooperation agencies, that understand this idea of accompanying them. But there's also solid organizations that are able to help us with these cases. And I do believe that this is something that can be part of what we learn learn between continents. This can be a southern experience that we can exchange this. And of course, it's not easy. You do have to have a minimal team because we do have to have that.
Yes, yes. Thank you. We have one more question, which is not so much on the UN advocacy, but about decision making of young people. This question is from Paula. I recognize forcing someone to have an abortion could mean a kind of violence too. But when we are talking about girls in such young age, 11 or 12 years, should we trust them to make such a decision as having an abortion or not in case of sexual violence? How can we assure they have enough neutral information in order to make this decision? I ask this because recently a girl 11 years old in Brazil have had her second pregnancy resulting from rape, and by her she was convinced by her religious family to keep both of them. So in cases like that, how can we make sure the victim has real autonomy to make such a decision?
Mira, no sé si es que nosotras podemos
I don't
asegurar
know if we can really make sure that the victims in general can have the capacity. We believe that most of them don't have it, but something that we do have to be very clear on for those of us who accompany the processes is that those who we accompany are clear on the fact that they have this need. That is why we have to work with the victims. We have to make their voices heard. And I think at a very young age, and I think this is important to say, I think even at a very young age, girls are able to decide and say whether they want to continue or not with a pregnancy. So I mean, this is one of the central aspects because these are not short processes, these are long processes where we have to guarantee respect, this deep respect towards the decision that the girl makes.
Yes, I completely agree with you on the fact that we need to trust girls for taking decisions for themselves. And sometimes we think that they are young, as old as 11 or 12, but sometimes they really know what they want. And it's just about how you ask, or how, there's an environment for them to say what they want. So I think that is also very important. And we do have a session next week, which is on adolescents' access to abortion. So we will also talk about this more in depth. Any other questions? Anybody would like to unmute and ask something? Or maybe just a comment.
No sé si hay alguna pregunta. En todo caso, yo quiero contar algo.
Is there any questions? If not, can I tell a story? Shruti, is that okay?
Yes, yes. I don't see any hands.
Fíjese, uno de los casos que en este momento
One of the
tenemos.
cases that we have right now is the case of Camila. Camila, well, we're waiting for an answer from international instances. And this is a girl of 13 years of age that was raped by her father. The girl went to the health facilities and she was categorical in saying, I do not want this pregnancy. The prosecutor in the hospital did not help the girl. She used the argument that she did not want the pregnancy to later accuse her of having a self-abortion when she had a miscarriage. So let's imagine this situation, this critical situation, and therefore these situations help us understand that indeed girls are able to make decisions, but the problem is that they do not always have the backing, the support to do it. And that's what creates difficulties. I think the difficulties are created by the adults and not necessarily the girls.
Yes, I agree with that completely. Any questions, comments, or should we call it a day? Yes, Paula, if you would like to unmute and yes, of course.
I think I didn't make myself clear. What I meant was more about how can we protect young girls from things or from people that might get in the way from them having their autonomy respected, because that's what I meant with the story. I think it's clear that the girl wanted to have an abortion, but her family, because of religion matters, convinced her to keep. So and what I think is quite common is, I know mostly Brazilian reality, but what it's very common is that sometimes uh, and what was seen in another case where the judges try to convince another girl to keep the baby, even calling it a baby during doing an audience. And my question was, how can we create strategies to protect them from this kind of thing, to make sure that that they can be respected in this, they don't have to go through processes like this. That's what I was trying to ask, actually. Thank you.
Sí. Yo creo que tu pregunta es.
Yes, I think that your question is actually very important and we have to consider it. Let's see. I think that I don't really know one single case, and we have accompanied many, many cases of girls that have forced pregnancies where the whole family agrees with the abortion unanimously. It's usually a fight within the family and also outside of the family. So every case is complicated, and in every case there's forces that will be in favor and forces that will be against. And the forces in favor are usually weaker than the forces against. One of the things that we have found, or one of the routes that we have found, is to ask the girl who she trusts in most. Who is the person that protects her and puts her rights and her integrity and her interests above beliefs or above other elements. And this is a good starting point to see who we are going to talk to in the family, because we do have to talk to the family. So there will be a given moment, well, and we may not talk to the mother or the father. Sometimes we've had to talk to the aunt in the family. And that family, in turn, has to have their own discussions of their own conflicts. But they have to understand that the decision to protect the girls should be above. And of course, it's not easy. And what you're saying, I think, is almost 100% of the cases where we do have conflicts in terms of that decision. And I'm sorry. Also, something else that I think is important. The ones who do not have the right to have that conflict are the authorities, though, because they do have an obligation, and therefore there I do believe that you have to go to what the law and protection says, and no country in Latin America makes it legal to sacrifice the life of one person for the life of another. So I think that, or well, no one can be asked to make extreme sacrifices. So when a girl is forced to take to term a pregnancy, she's being asked for an extreme sacrifice. So this is so you don't go against the family, the mother of the family, or even the rapist. We have to go against the states who do not protect the girl. That's what our coup is about.
Yeah. Thanks, Susanna. Paula says thank you. It was very clarifying. We have another question from Serena, but before we take that question, I just want to say if it could be that you haven't been to the UN and you might have very basic questions. I just want to say that whatever is there on your mind, please just feel free to say or ask question. So Serena asks, I understand that there are like certain periods where we submit our position papers or reports on the situation of women and girls, SRHR, etc., in UN mechanisms. But can we also submit to UN mechanisms even before or after the prescribed periods? If so, is there any difference on how they process the cases?
Definitivamente, colocar los temas
Definitely putting the topics within an opportunity would be basic. For example, in this case, the periodic exams or evaluations, country evaluations are strategic, but we also have to work connectedly to send certain submissions. We have to remember that our countries, many times, the human rights instances have these instances, and they can give us guidance on how to channel these topics. So I think an important explorations of the UN and human rights dependencies in the countries is fundamental, so that you can be able to talk, so they can learn about their calendars and look at what is in the agenda. For example, for Latin America, the instances, human rights instances, have certain agendas. At a given time, for example, here, the Inter-American Human Rights Court proposed the topic for the agenda of pregnancies in girls, and this was an opportunity for the submissions. So we have to pay attention to the calls and the requests for reports. It's very important to be aware of these reports so that we can adequately respond. And it's also important to have someone in our groups specialize in how to follow these international instances. And this person is the one that can generate these spaces, because when these reports come in, not from one organization, but from a set of organizations, they are better observed, and they can also give a better explanation of certain topics or certain situations.
Yes, that's helpful, Susanna. I think I just wanted to share one more update from India today. So we heard today morning that the Supreme Court of India gave a ruling just today, a day after the International Safe Abortion Day, saying that both married and unmarried women should have equal access to abortion. And earlier in the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act in India, there was a clause which said that only married women can access abortion in case of contraceptive failure. So that was a very, very good news today morning. And it also said that the judge also said that rape, even in case of marital rape, should be considered for abortion, because marital rape is not recognized by the Indian state. But the judge today morning said that even if it is a case of marital rape, access to abortion should not be denied. So I just wanted to share that.
Excelente, excelente, de verdad. Felicitaciones.
Excellent. Congratulations. This is something that did not come free. This is long work and continuous work done by many people.
Yes, absolutely. And 2 years back, when we were advocating with the parliament for changing the law, etc., there were certain things that were not accepted. But now the Supreme Court has given a ruling on that. And let's see how that goes in terms of implementation, etc., because implementation also has certain flaws a lot of times. But this is a great news to begin with. Thank you. I don't see any more questions, but I hope you all also were part of different events, etc., that happened in your country for the International Safe Abortion Day. And if you have any stories, any updates, etc., to share with us, please do so. And we can publicize it on our social media as well. And I think with that, we are good to close. Susana, thank you very much. It was indeed very, very insightful session and very interesting. Just the way you narrated the entire story, I think that presentation was really great and it will stay with us. So thank you for joining us. And I think, yeah, with that we can close. Thank you, everyone. I will see you next week.
Muchísimas gracias y ha sido un enorme placer estar acá.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.